What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to Eat, Train, Prosper. This is episode 154, and we are talking reverse dieting strategies. So we haven't recorded in about 2 weeks as I believe Brian had some travel or was sick, and then I had some travel, and now we're back into it. So we have some updates to dive into. As always, Brian, can you kick us off, please?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of updates. It's been a long time. I've missed talking to all of you beautiful people. So I'll get through a few of them quickly, and then I have a couple longer ones. But starting on 5/27, we're dropping new cycles for Paragon. I know that is still a few weeks out, but it's a strength cycle, and it's the first strength cycle we've done for a while because we're just finishing up a 20-week hypertrophy cycle. As usual with all of our strength cycles, we offer a hypertrophy option as well because there's a minority of our members that prefer not to do strength cycles, which I totally understand. So yeah, starting 5/27, we'll have strength cycles and a correlated kind of hypertrophy cycle along with that. Should be some fun new movements and bit of a different stimulus than we've been doing, for the last 20 weeks. Just a little housekeeping note that Aaron and I were discussing before the show. Our buddy Shantae, the movement maestro, let me know that we still haven't finished our body part series, and she's 100% right. We have hamstrings and arms still left to do, assuming we're not really going to do calves and traps and shit, just kind of throwing those in as, part of the larger muscle groups. But yeah, we'll do hamstrings and arms. So we have at least, 2 more episodes of that coming up here down the road. And then the last of my quick updates is we have our Misogi, which I've talked about on prior episodes. This is my big challenge that's supposed to be a 50-50 chance of success, a 50% chance of failure. And it's a long hike that I've been planning with a few of my friends. As discussed on prior episodes, I don't think that this is actually a 50-50. I think it's more like a 80-20, like I'm probably going to succeed. But it is like 17 miles of hiking with 6,000 feet of vert and all being done in one day. It's like 4 of the big hikes in Boulder back to back to back to back. So that's happening on 5/19. Today, as we record, is 5/7. So I guess it'll be a few days after this episode comes out. And then I'll update you guys on the next one about kind of how it went and if we succeeded and all that good stuff. So I have a few more updates, but I want to kick it over to Aaron. He has been traveling in Australia and maybe even somewhere else, somewhere in Asia. And I don't really know about his trip and I'm curious. So tell us how it's been, man.
So I was in Melbourne in Australia for like 4 days. There was supposed to be a Japan trip on the back of that, got canceled because of some unfortunate events with an injury with an injury in Jackson. So he was planning to compete in Japan, and then obviously that got kind of taken with the injury. So yeah, it's pretty upsetting because it's the same injury that he suffered like well over 2 years ago at this point. That's like kind of come back to bite him in the ass again with that like back wound. So pretty kind of heartbreaking, to be completely honest there.
For sure.
But no, it was my first time in Melbourne, second time in Australia. And it was cool to see, I always feel I'm fortunate to be able to just like travel and stuff. However, it's kind of ironic is I love the idea of travel. And then once I get like settled into it, I realize I just want to go back home. Mm-hmm. I just thrive on my routine like so much. I hate being away from it. And within like a day and a half, I just don't feel good. And then like I'll have that one meal out that kind of like upsets my stomach. And then I'm like managing that. And it just all happens kind of quickly. And I'm like, you know what? I really like my life. I can't wait to like get back to my normal routine and that sort of thing. But I do feel fortunate. There was the trip was for numerous reasons. I've put on a bunch of weight since January, since I started exogenous testosterone in my build and that sort of thing. And the biggest clothes sizes here in Bali don't fit me. I'll order like a double XL and it is way too tight. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'll just donate that shirt. So I needed to do shopping. Same thing with the Vans. They don't carry Vans in my size here. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll go to Australia and I'll get some Vans. I find out being in the van store that they do not order an 11 and a half in any of the van stores in Australia. They order an 11 and a 12. And like, it was like a dagger to the heart when this dude told me this. Cause I was like, I had it in my mind. I'm going to go there. I'm going to get all my staple Vans shoes. Like I'm going to be set for like 6 months, like no problem. And then I was like, of course there's no 11 and a half. Right. And the 11s are too small and the 12s are like way too big. So that was pretty frustrating. The other part was my body weight just cratered being over there, even with like trying to like eat late. And I went to the store and got like a bunch of like oatmeal packs and like fruit to be able to hodgepodge like meals together at night. I would eat out like 3 times per day and make sure to always eat like the larger things in it. And I think it was just the extra steps and how much I actually do eat. I mean, day over day, I was dropping like another, pretty much a kilo as I was there.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Oh, you're like 220 right now. Is that right?
This morning I was 218.4 or whatever, but last Monday I was 223.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I can't imagine how much food must go into even maintaining 220 pounds of body weight, much less to gain weight at 220. Because, I mean, for me to even get above 200, I have to feel like I'm constantly stuffing myself and even kind of go off the board with some unhealthier food choices. And yeah, I mean, another 20 pounds of muscle on top of that is insane. Like I totally empathize with your plight.
Yeah. I mean, it's manageable when I have my normal schedule, but like I eat, 7 a.m., 10 a.m. intra workout, 1 p.m.'s post workout, like 3, 6, 8:39. Like that's how every single day is and you just can't manage that when traveling. So I'm kind of frustrated, right? But I mean, it is what it is. And that's just the nature of it. But the kind of shining light of the trip was there's a pretty cool brand of gym in Australia called Doherty's in most of like the major cities. And just like cool bodybuilding, gyms, they had it's either Gen 1 or Gen 2. I couldn't tell based off of like looking up photos because they seemed a little bit interchangeable, but an old school Nautilus leg extension, right? Gen 1 or Gen 2. So I'm talking literally from like the early 70s, potentially late 60s.
Like Arthur Jones days of the Casey Viator experiment and all that. Yeah.
It was amazing. And like my mind, I'd seen them on like Instagram and stuff, but I'd never seen one in person. And I used it when I trained legs. And it was so hard for me to like sit there and be like, they figured this out 50 fucking years ago, over 50 years ago. And we still have like these companies producing dog shit leg extension machines in 2024. And everything about it was wonderful. The seat was like reclined so that you could get the nice stretch in the rec fem. Mm-hmm. It would not bottom out. You could insane stretch. It wouldn't top out. So you could go like, you could like hyper extend if you had that kind of flexibility. You could load it really. I mean, it was an amazing machine. And I'm like, this thing is literally over 50 years old. And he had it perfected so long ago. And then I put this up on my Instagram stories. I had my entire leg day, almost my entire leg day in that room. I watched no less than 8 to 10 different people do leg extensions. Only me and one other dude who was a little bit older than me and a bodybuilder used the Nautilus. Everyone else was using like the shitty techno gym one. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. It was really hard for me to wrap my head around. But I feel fortunate that like I'm privy to this information now. Like I get what I want out of it. My clients get what they need out of it. Everyone learns on their, own time or never does. And that's just the way it works.
Yeah, I feel like the new wave of machines is really targeting more Gen Pop, where they want it to be almost this like spaceship experience where they're going for comfort and visual appeal over function. Yeah. And so, yeah, I see this all across gyms now. Like these machines are getting bigger and cushier and comfier, almost like they look like a first class seat on an airplane or something like that. And what you really just need is that super compact one that actually has the dimensions and the function to get the ranges of motion that you want and load it properly. And it's just, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, but it was very cool. for me.
Did you have some other quality training sessions there? Or what was like, did you trade with some of your boys there, or what was the story?
Yeah, I trained with a friend, Cade, the first day. The other two sessions, I decided I trained by myself. And I had really quality training sessions, actually. A really, really good leg day. I had a very solid push day the morning before the show. And that's what I was traveling for. There was the IFBB Nationals in Australia. I had some quality training sessions there for sure.
Cool. Are you still doing the steep incline anterior delt press on your push day?
I have it with a Smith machine.
Ah, okay. I was just curious because I know before you started your TRT, I remember we were talking about it, and I think you were using 36s, maybe 36 kilos. Maybe it was 40 kilos, whatever it was. I remember it being slightly above what I was using. And so I was just curious, as your strength and your body weight have gone up with the exogenous testosterone, what kind of weights you're pushing on that now. And it was also brought up in a conversation I was having with Dave McConey and Abel, because Abel just hit the 35 kilos for 6, and we were talking about how strong you are on it. And so I was just curious if there was an update on that.
Yeah. So sorry. I still do have the dumbbell interior delt press on. I have a shoulder day, but I do also have like a narrow one on my push, which I actually did today. Almost 2 weeks ago was the last time I trained. Yeah. Cause I didn't do that day when I was traveling. The dumbbell interior delt press, I did 42 kilos for 9. So I will go up, because I topped the rep range 2 weeks ago. So I'll do 44s on Saturday. So in a couple days.
Sick. Well, 44s are going to be 97 pounds per dumbbell. So you're getting really dang close to the hundreds for a vertical press, which is, I feel like, a super goal, like life goal, to overhead press the hundreds is pretty cool.
Yeah. There's been some cool like training performance stuff. Of course, nothing that actually like fucking matters. Like my pendulum squat numbers have not drastically improved, nor my hack squat or anything like that. But like some pull down stuff for sure. The seated leg extension is one that I've gotten significantly stronger at. Like I'm full stacking it now.
Leg curl or leg extension? Leg extension.
Leg extension.
Got it.
The Arsenal leg curl is like one of the ones where they kind of just put the same weight stack on everything. And some of them are just like impractical. like on the prone lying leg curl, I don't even know if I'm like halfway down the stack, you know, but then on like the leg curl, I'm literally maxing it. So,
leg extension. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Leg extension. I keep just word vomiting that incorrectly. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
Cool. Well, that sounds fun. Keep us updated on the overhead press. I know Abel is curious about that as well.
Yeah. I'll see if I can get a video this week.
Sick. Do it up. Cool. So I will try not to belabor my updates here, but the last we spoke, I was sort of just beginning my adventure into cardio season, so to speak, and had gotten back from Costa Rica and begun my new prioritization, 5 days a week of biking, cardio, and 2 days a week of lifting. And so that's actually been going extremely well. I guess I'll back up. We did a mountain biking trip, a guy's trip to Fruto, which is this like haven of mountain biking in Western Colorado, kind of right on the Utah border. And we were there for 3 days this year. We only did 2 last year and got a ton of biking in. I think we went 2.5 hours the first day. We did a double day the second day where we did 3 hours followed by 2 hours after lunch. So like 5 hours of biking that day. And then we hit another 3, I think, the next day. So that's the most biking that I've done in a 3-day period in my entire life. And I'd been hearing on podcasts and stuff that they call them training camps, where basically you just go and you double or triple your normal workload for a few days, and then you recover and you come back and you're supposed to see all of these new adaptations. And I had never experienced that before, but was curious whether I would. And so we did this thing. I performed really well. It was super fun. I had one small fall, but nothing like last year where I got this massive bone bruise on my humerus falling over my handlebars. So this year was much more success there, but came back. And since then, the biking, especially a few days like after I recovered and got into that week post the mountain biking trip, I had some of my best performances that I've had yet in biking at all, like even across the board. And so when I look back and compare my numbers to where I was right before my race last year, so I'm talking like late September because my race was in October, and I compared those results to what I was putting out, last week after the Fruita trip, and they're like really close. I might be like a few seconds behind, like a percentage point behind on some stuff. Like one thing I did in 9:30 and it took me 9:40 this time, and like a bunch of stuff like that. And then to think that I am also 15 pounds heavier right now than I was at the end of biking season last year, and that I'm still being able to kind of match those numbers and that output. I think that training camp, if you want to call it that, is just a bunch of bros hanging out and drinking beer and mountain biking. But the training camp was extremely effective and makes me think about kind of batching some of this training in the future. And then kind of on that same note, we had another trip planned this past weekend. I went to Moab and we did some camping out there. And so for whatever reason, I had like 2 weeks in a row after Fruita where I only had 4 really hard training days during the week. And then I was forced into taking Friday, Saturday, Sunday off of lifting and cardio, and just really hammered the 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, before the Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. And that seems to have been an extremely effective approach for me as well, because like I think in the past I've leaned toward this idea of taking 3 days off is going to be harder to get back into it. I'm going to lose adaptations, whatever. But it seems like the increased recovery from taking these 3 days in a row off have really helped actually create new adaptations. And some of my best biking has been like the day after these 3 days off. And so it's really, in a lot of ways, it's starting to shift my perspective on how much dose or volume is needed, and whether maybe I have been missing out on achieving adaptations that would have come faster if I would have given myself more recovery time. And this is really, it's a struggle for me. Like I very much want to be training, and I feel like training is what's going to push me forward. Kind of like, I think the newbie stage of lifting, where you feel like the more you can go to the gym, the more results you're going to get. And it's been a process of me kind of figuring this out as I go through the cardio journey too, and like how much recovery is actually needed. So yeah, I'll keep everyone updated kind of on that aspect as it continues to go and I continue to learn more about it. Training has been great. As far as training, I guess it's all training. Lifting weights has been great. The 2 times a week full body is exactly like perfect for me. And it's keeping my motivation to go lift high, which has been a nice revelation compared to last year where I was training 4 or 5 times a week with weights and really kind of dreading the sessions because of how much exercise I was doing with the cardio and the weights. So 2 times a week has been really good. And I just yesterday tried something new on my program. So I kind of went off my program, and instead of doing what is mostly like a 5x5 or a 4x6 to 8 for most of my movements, which means it's pretty heavy and I'm taking significant rests between sets, I increased the volume, but I shortened the rest. And the pump that I got was insane. Like I guess I forgot what a true pump feels like in weightlifting, because I always do these lower rep sets with these longer rest periods, which it's still in the hypertrophy range. Like 5 to 8 is really where I like to train. But, they're so demanding that physically I take such long rests between sets that there really isn't a huge pump that accumulates. It's like you'll get a pump briefly after a set and then it dissipates and then it comes back again. Taking shorter rests. So yesterday I did 18 work sets in 32 minutes. So I just kind of had this nice antagonistic superset thing going back and forth. And I mostly focused on delts and back or lats, and just kind of alternated between movements that hit those muscle groups. And the pump that I had at the end of that session was the stuff of like newbie days. I felt so blown up and everything was so tight and rigid. It was both kind of nauseating and invigorating at the same time. And so I think I'm going to experiment with doing a cycle this way, because it's been so long and I've spent so much time doing these low rep sets with these long rest periods that I think, if nothing else, being fun, potentially instilling some new adaptations from metabolite, if that's a thing. I don't really know. It felt like a thing yesterday. So yeah, I don't know. Those are any thoughts on any of that? How do you feel about the rest periods between sets and stuff like that?
I mean, Aaron of a few years ago was definitely like, sometimes I would use like 90 seconds, whatever. Like now everything's bare minimum 2.5 minutes, 2.5 leg days. It might be like 4 to 5 on some, like a hack squat or something. I just need it. Like my heart rate will still be super high at a 3 minute, point.
Yeah.
I do think there's some utility to it, even if it's just the enjoyment factor. Right. And that's like something where earlier on, when I didn't really like to take longer rest times, it's because I didn't enjoy it. And like just having that pump, like it feels good. There's I don't know if you know who Dom Mazzetti is, but he was like, used to be a very big like internet, early like Instagram comedy kind of person. But there's always this line that he had is like, the pump is the biggest you've ever been and the biggest you will ever be. And I always thought that was like a really funny, catchy thing, but it's true. Like you just feel better, because the whole thing, like, I mean, maybe not for some of the women and stuff listening, but the whole point of going to the gym and stuff for a lot of us was like, you just want to be jacked and you want to feel jacked. And the pump is like it's like a 10% bump on what you have, and you feel like it's like a 30% bump.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I do think there's even if it's just from an enjoyment standpoint, like it feels good for the most part. I have unfortunately experienced some incredibly painful pumps over the past few months, and it was like a overdosing on a good thing, I'm like, this feels horrible now.
Yeah.
So typically a lot of fun, but it can unfortunately be very painful as well.
Yeah. I agree on leg days, especially if you are really pushing sets close to failure at heavier loads. I do think if you went like more for that pump approach and you were doing sets of like 15, but you were doing, say, constant tension reps and maybe 5 RIR, which is still a really hard set, but like 15 reps at 5 RIR, you can get a massive pump in there, but have it not be quite as debilitating to your soul as doing a set of like 7 to 1 RIR or something like that. And so, I don't know. I'm still kind of ruminating on all of this and what that would mean, but I enjoyed it. And I think it's at least worth exploring for like a 6-week mesocycle, potentially during my biking season, just because I think part of it, what I really liked is that it was way less demanding from like a central nervous system standpoint. And granted, like I only did, like I said, delts and lats or back. So I was alternating. Initially, I did like cable Y raises with a single arm lat pull down, and I did some rear delt pull downs, and I did some cable laterals, and did some pull ups and some push ups. And so, I mean, alternating between upper body stuff like that is not going to be nearly as fatiguing as doing that with leg work would be. But yeah, felt cool. So I'll keep you guys updated. If I did add it into the program, it would be part of the Brian's program thing, obviously. And I have 2 tracks for that. I have like the optimal hypertrophy track, which is in the middle of a cycle right now that won't be touched. So it would be for like Brian's program 2, which is basically what I'm doing now, which is my kind of 2 times a week full body program. So anyway, keep you guys updated there. And last thing, man, this has really dragged on. Every couple years, I get the desire to back squat with a barbell and just do it because I want to make sure that I can still do it. And so that was what I did last week. I did my biannual back squat through 315 on the bar and just kind of see how it feels. I did 3 sets of 2. And it felt really, really heavy. It looked fast on video. Everyone is like, oh, that was like, you crushed that. That was like 8 RIR or whatever. I'm like, man, it did not feel like 8 RIR. But it was cool. Like, I think there is some value in just making sure that you can still put heavy ass weight on your back and sit down and stand up with it every now and then. And just kind of one of those funny things, meathead times, but something I enjoy doing every now and then.
I'm gonna let my ego not get the best of me and let that creep into my mind. Just
Yeah, no,
not doing that.
don't worry about it.
I
Don't
cannot
worry
believe I
about it.
forgot this. This is by far the coolest update I have. So I'm at the bodybuilding show in Melbourne on Saturday. We were there to see one of our friends compete in classic physique. Like that was pretty much the reason we were there. That had ended. Bodybuilding was on. Like my friends had all left, and I was like, I'll just hang out and watch some bodybuilding, and just sit here and see how much I can learn. So I'm just sitting there by myself, and some guy comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, excuse me, is your name Aaron?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Aaron from Eat, Train, Prosper?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I was literally listening to your podcast as I drove over to the show." And I was like, "No fucking way." So then he sat down and we talked, and is this guy named Chris in Melbourne. And it was like a very, very like wholesome, cool moment. And it was just like, "Thank you. Like the podcast is awesome. I learned so much, blah, blah, blah." And it was one of those like, yes, this is really, really cool. I don't think I said it on the podcast also, but maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago when I was leaving the gym, some guy came up to me and he was like, "Hey, are you Aaron from Eat, Train, Prosper?" And I was like, "Yes." And it's just wild. Like it's happened to, I don't know, maybe like 6 times since I've been in Bali where someone's like walked up to me and asked like, "Hey, are you Aaron?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's me," which is just like wild to me. But it was very, very cool. I was happy to sit there and, have a conversation with him. And it was one of those things where it made me really happy that we do the podcast, and like, obviously, this, Brian, but like, we don't make any money off the podcast. We spend thousands of dollars per year to produce the podcast. And it's really just like a labor of love and a camaraderie thing. Of course, I love getting to speak to you and hang out still. But it was a very cool, like full circle moment where I'm like, I'm very happy that we produce this project and we do it because people do take a lot of value from it. And that made me feel like very just like warm, complete, whatever kind of feeling that I can't seem to find the words for, but it was very cool.
Yeah, dude, that warmed my heart completely as you were saying it. And I just get so giddy inside thinking about that impact and how cool that is for you to be like this little micro celebrity. So all of it, a micro, teeny little micro celebrity. Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, just super cool. I'm really glad you shared that, and awesome that Chris and everyone else will come up and say something, because that does really make it worth it. Like if you see Aaron or I out in public and you want to chat at all, always please do that.
100%.
All right, cool. All right. Well, so dude, I was looking back at episodes because I thought we addressed this reverse dieting thing at some point when it was a really big deal. Stronger by Science put out a really big thing maybe a year or two ago about how reverse dieting is basically a scam and it's not really like a real thing. And I mean, they love to take these really like polarized views of these things to get clicks, of course. But I thought that we had covered it and I couldn't find the episode. So maybe I just didn't go back far enough. But either way, I know that you have some thoughts on it, definitely some probably updated thoughts since that all went down a year or two ago. So I'll kind of let you jump in and introduce it.
Yeah. So it came from a question, right? Which is obviously how we end up talking about a lot of these things. But the concept of the reverse diet, if you're not so inclined yet, it's effectively exactly like it sounds. So with a typical diet, right, a caloric deficit, we are incrementally reducing calories to, the goal isn't to get calories low. That's just, a step that's needed to produce the outcome of lower body weight, less body fat. The reverse diet's kind of the opposite. We are starting effectively at the end of a diet, and we incrementally increase calories up until finding like what would be a new maintenance, or potentially you just keep going into a build or whatever the goals are. That is the concept of the reverse diet. Now, with kind of the question here, and I guess I can read it a little bit, but the person said, "Hey, I'm finishing a deficit, 15 pounds down." So we don't have the context of how much of a total body mass loss that 15 pounds is. If it's maybe a male at 200 pounds, it might be 8 or so, percent of total body mass, not as significant. If this is like a smaller male who maybe started at 160 or a female who maybe started at 150, obviously a significantly larger relative depth of a deficit. And
this guy, by the way, just for context, this is a bigger guy. I believe he's over 6 feet and probably in the 200-pound range when he started, 215-pound range when he started would be my guess.
okay, I'm glad you said that because that changes a lot of things. And but I will kind of finish. And the reason it's important is going from 215 to 200, and let's say 6 foot, 215, you're going to be about maybe like 18% body fat, unless you're kind of like a genetic kind of freak sort of thing. If you were someone a lot smaller and you're going from like 150 to 135, that is a significantly larger relative delta in total body mass. And the amount of metabolic adaptation that you may encounter can be significantly, more large, right? And that can impact which side of the fence of the approach that you take, right? And this is all really, really contextually important. So we kind of, like I said, have two strategies, right? Strategy one is the hard and fast, which is effectively not a reverse diet. Let's say your maintenance calories are 3,000 for a very simple example purposes. You end your diet at 2,000 calories and it's like, sick, diet's over, tomorrow I go back to 3,000 calories, right? And that would be an estimated 3,000 based off of your new estimated maintenance calories from your body weight. Let's say this gentleman, his maintenance calories were 3,000 at 215 pounds. Now he's 200 pounds. The maintenance calories will not be 3,000. They'll be pretty close. Like it's not going to be a massive delta, probably still 2,900 or something like that. That is kind of strategy one, hard and fast. Strategy two is incremental and slower. Using that same example, let's say maintenance is now effectively 2,900 calories. We end our diet at 2,000 and we could do a number of different ways. You could do over 9 weeks, you increase your calories, 100 calories every single week. That would be kind of the slowest I think I would go. I wouldn't see any reason to go any slower than that. Another approach is you could do a larger jump one, maybe from like 2,000 to 2,300. And then you have like an extra 6 weeks of 100 calories or something like that. There is no hard and fast rule of like X happens, then Y happens. So those are the kind of two strategies. And then how I kind of compartmentalized it here to explain it is then we offer the pros and the cons of each strategy. Ryan, before I dive into those, do you have any feedback or anything?
Yeah, I just think I'll double down on what you said about the context of it mattering between, what body weight is, where you started, and that 15 pounds, how significant that is. But also, and it's somewhat related to that, is how lean you actually got. So just because someone started at 150 and lost 15 pounds doesn't mean that that person is a ridiculous, lean, shredded 135. They could have been over fat 150, lost 15 pounds, and they're still 15% body fat as a male, or say 17% body fat after losing 15 pounds. So the context here is how lean did you get? Like if you got shredded down to bodybuilding style, stepping on stage shredded, that might require a different approach coming back up than somebody who went from 20% body fat to 14% body fat or something along those lines.
Correct. Yeah. It's in the reason it's contextually important is there are negative adaptations to a natural human physiology that happens as you get very, very lean. The most common ones here, we get, significant impacts to your daily energy levels. Typically a pretty large reduction in sex drive. We see this in both males and females. This is something, full disclosure, like I experience this a lot. Like when I get super lean, I want nothing to do with sex, like remotely. To me, it feels like a labor. I'm like, oh my God, okay, yeah, but like I'm not happy about it. It's the sort of thing, which is wild. Training performance, it's really, really hard to perform from a training standpoint, and kind of just like a general well-being. Like you just don't feel that great because You're at it. You've been living in a constrained energy environment for a number of weeks to produce it. And there's detriments to your how well you produce thoughts and your ability to think quickly and perform mental tasks. It bleeds into pretty various aspects of your life when you get super, super lean. So with that, I guess I'll get into kind of the pros of the hard and fast strategy. If you do get very, very lean enough to where you have these very real, tangible negative impacts in the quality of your life, it makes more sense to raise calories faster, pretty much overnight, a light switch sort of thing, so that we can faster reverse some of these adaptations that have begun to take place, right? Another reason that I like this strategy for those individuals is because we get to take advantage of some super compensation. And this is something, I mean, you will see it to smaller degrees if you're getting like shredded, let's call shredded 10% and under as a male. Like you'll have clearly defined abs, probably some like veins in the abs, but no like walnut glutes or Christmas tree in the back sort of thing yet. We get this super compensation where, let's say, okay, diet's over. You were eating 2,000 calories, diet's over. Monday, you can eat like 600, 700 grams of carbs, like way overshoot the maintenance calories. And you might wake up even lighter the next day. Like we see it in the bodybuilding preps a lot. And this is something for me, like I have a personal fascination with this concept. Because from my understanding, and I could be wrong, we still don't have a good mechanism of action explaining how it works. Because what we do understand with like, hey, a gram of glycogen is also going to store, an accompanying 2.7 grams of water. We can put approximately in like a, let's call it a 200-pound size male, 400 grams of glycogen in between the liver and muscle. Okay, we multiply that by 2.7, let's call it 3. We get an extra 1,200 grams. We should be up, effectively about 2,000 grams, which is 2 kilos. So let's call that 4.4 pounds just from loading that. But that's not what we see. People will wake up lighter after pushing 700 grams of carbs, which is hard to actually wrap your head around. So I think the hard and fast one, we can take advantage of that, which is it's cool to experience and it's kind of fun. You get to have this day where it helps with a lot of the hunger, energy levels, like training performance will improve pretty quickly on the back end of that. And it's a great start to, us feeding up. And the other pro is it provides a quicker transition into a gaining periodization if desired, right? From an investment on time. If the goal is, hey, I got lean and now I want to go into a build, you're not wasting, effectively 8 weeks of slowly incrementing calories that we know isn't actually going to be sufficient enough to produce the positive hypertrophic adaptations that we're after. So that's another pro. I don't know why I keep trying to mix pro and con together. Now, getting into some of the cons for this, it's hard to execute well, right? And a reason that like Brian brought up with a body fat being a potential decision factor, if you had the adherence ability to get super, super lean, you are typically going to have the skills, typically, not always, to be able to execute this well, but not always. If someone was dieting, starting at like 20% body fat, I'm speaking about as a male, you don't really have a good grip on your nutrition typically if you're like 20% in plus, right? And the example I like to use is like giving someone the keys to a Ferrari, right? If it's just like you've been driving a Toyota Corolla and like tomorrow I'm like, hey, here's the keys to this Ferrari, most people are going to crash it, right? And it's hey, you've been at 2,000 calories managing, tomorrow 3,000. Deal with them responsibly. A lot of people will fuck that up and way overshoot, and their dietary adherence and stuff will fall by the wayside, and then they start rapidly putting body fat back on. So it's a lot of people, unfortunately, cannot be trusted with an immediate increase in 1,000 calories, for example, here. And it's, again, just not being able to properly self-govern and self-manage. And this is something that happens to a lot of people in bodybuilders, mostly in like obviously your beginner ranks and stuff that prep for shows, is they just cannot deal with the the keys to the Ferrari, right? And they crashed the Ferrari because of that.
Yeah, part of that's probably just because they got so lean that they needed it. So maybe the reverse diet for that person isn't the right strategy. And so it's a con, but it's a con as a result of the fact that they were so lean, and maybe the slower reverse diet is maybe the wrong approach for them to be taking anyways.
It's a very interesting dynamic between, we have a battle of like physiology and psychology, right? Mm-hmm. The beauty in the reverse, in the whole utility in the reverse, has effectively zero to do from a physiologic standpoint. And that is what that old Stronger by Science article in an argument is. And I am in full agreement with that. But it's, humans do not exist in a vacuum. And we know that the human psychology is pretty much the end all be all, right? So many people are either they are the greats because of their psychology, or they constantly self-sabotage because of their psychology. And from kind of my standpoint, being a coach that works with a lot of people, there are a lot of clients that cannot handle the keys to the Ferrari. You know what I mean? Even though that is the physiologic best approach to, manage those adaptations. And we take the reverse dieting approach purely from a human psychology standpoint because of that. So I like you brought it up. It's a wonderful point. And that's really the basis of this entire episode and conversation, is like, how are you wired from a psychologic standpoint? Can you manage, hey, you just wrapped up the diet, but now we need to diet another 8 weeks just at a increasingly shallower depth of the diet. Yeah. Or, hey, we've been driving a Corolla. Can I hand you the keys to the Ferrari tomorrow? And can you keep it on the road? And it's a massive, which side of the fence are you on from a psychological standpoint?
Yeah. Not to create too much of a tangent here, but I feel like sometimes when the people take the slow reverse diet, it seems like going into it, their goal is almost not to gain weight. Like they're like, how many calories can I add into my diet and still maintain this body weight that I got to at the end of my deficit? And so it is like you can do this. You will see someone say they end their diet at 2,000 calories and they creep it back up, and it's like 2,100, then 2,200, then 2,300, then 2,400. And maybe like 2 months later, they're at 2,500 or something like that. You can see this happen where people will maintain body weight despite eating 500 calories more per day than they were eating prior. But to Aaron's point, I think what you're doing in that case is you're just prolonging the diet, because you're not actually getting your body back into like a good anabolic state. And so you're still in this state of sense of depletion, and you're just maintaining that depletion, even though you're giving your body a little bit more food. And so, yeah, it's super interesting that battle of psychology and physiology, and then kind of how that plays into each person's individual context.
Yeah. And it really, using the example you used, I will say it, like some people just, hey, like, let's say someone has like a belly, and they're like, hey, I just want to get the belly gone and get back to like a healthy body composition. For the podcast listeners, I'm using air quotes because that's highly subjective. Yep. If we're dieting, from like overweight to like down to like a 20% body fat, which I wouldn't even really say is still like that healthy. You get to, let's say, okay, whatever, using the same exact example, 215 to 200. But let's, for all intents and purposes, say that this guy is like a really, let's say to like 12% body fat, which still really isn't abs yet, but like you're like athlete-esque shape, not physique athlete, but like a general athlete. Maybe that's 185 pounds. We're about 15 pounds over that. You're not really going to run into the kind of the objectively negative metabolic adaptations. You might have a little bit of like constrained, energy expenditure. Your body might be running a little bit lean in terms of the efficiency of how it distributes heat and energy, sort of thing. But you're probably not tanking your sex drive, probably not increasing your food focus to like a significant degree, those sorts of things. Excuse me. But for those people, like you can, if hey, I'm at 200, but my goal is still to be less than that. I think like, let's say that maintenance is a true 2,900. If you work back up to like 26, and that's kind of your baseline, and then you might have 2 free meals per week, where you go get, I don't know, burger and a couple beers or whatever. Like that is a very realistic way to maintain that 200 without that 200 turning into like 201, 203 6 weeks later. And then like the next thing you know, you're back up at like a 208, 209. And we see this a lot. So there is like the objective, yes, this is the right answer, but it is in the context of like your adherence is 100%. You don't have food focus. Like you're psychologically built to do this, where that's that stance that Stronger by Science argued. And I agree. I think they are objectively correct, but we know that most humans don't exist in a vacuum. And a lot of these psychological things are heavily influential. And to make the best kind of overall recommendation for practice, for humans in practice, I think we have to bring in that psychology because it just plays such a significant role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree completely. Where are we at in this? Because I know one of the things that he asked about as well was training during this stage. And so we don't have to jump into that yet, but just want to kind of keep that on the radar.
Yeah, I'll just run through the pros and cons, which I think we've already kind of covered some for the incremental and slower strategy. So from a mental and psychological standpoint, you are still dieting. You're just not as deep into the deficit as you kind of reverse out. And that does help with compartmentalization of it all. So that's a pro. Life gets incrementally easier each week as you get more food, less hunger, a little bit bits of training performance increases come, and it's easier to manage, right? So the slower increases in speed limit, using that same Lamborghini analogy, and less incident risk of crashing there. Cons: extends the total length of dieting. If we do 16-week diet, an 8-week reverse, we are effectively dieting for 24 weeks, right? Instead of the 16. And it does not yield any true physiologic benefit. It doesn't allow you to like ramp up or rev up your metabolism or some of these things that people say. The benefit is actually from being able to better manage your human psychology and not give you keys to the Ferrari on day one, pretty much.
Just to be leaner for longer.
Be leaner for longer and reduce the risk that you have these large caloric overages that start putting body fat back on faster.
Too quickly. Yeah.
So that's the kind of pros and cons that I have listed out here. And then, like Brian said, there's a part about training.
Yeah. So I actually am really curious on your thoughts, because you are more meticulous with the dieting aspect, and you work with nutrition clients. That means you have a lot more experience with reverse dieting in general. And so like my knee-jerk reaction to this is training doesn't really change at all. But I'm curious if you have any nuance that maybe would be added into that.
No, I mean, so something that I like to do, so I guess I actually have to back up a little bit. First, it needs to come to your goal, right? What's the goal? For the overwhelming majority of the clients that I work with, like they enjoy the gym, they want to look good, but they don't have any like very rarely like actual strength goals or anything like that. Just like, hey, I want to train. I don't want to have a dad bod. I want to look, the way that I want to look. So it's not like, hey, we're reverse dieting, so we're moving from like low reps to high reps, or I don't typically change anything like that. And most often what I do is I like to kind of allow these real world applications of things so that clients can kind of discover or not necessarily discover, but watch or experience things unfold in real time. So what I like to do is I don't like to change training after we end the diet. I like to keep us on the same training program for maybe like another 8 weeks or something, because I want them to see all these training performance adaptations like violently come back, where it's like I've been grinding at, trying to get the 6th rep of that bench press for like the last, maybe 6 weeks of my diet. And now food's been back up for 2 weeks. And instead of 6 reps, I'm at 9. Right. And then they report in the check and like, holy shit, the strength and performance, it changes profound. And it's just, that's something I really like to use just to illustrate, be like, yeah, like you can see now how the food and how the energy environment and that sort of thing like really does impact recovery, training performance, all of these things. So that's typically what I do. And it's really a really cool learning experience for clients. And that's the main reason I keep it in.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that that's exactly kind of where my head was going to, is if you're going to take that slow and steady reverse, then you mostly want to keep training the same so that you can see the impact that food has on your training. The other side of the coin would be the person that skips the reverse and goes kind of right back up to maintenance calories immediately. And so I think in that case, you could definitely keep it the same and you would see, you know, the same immediate, probably even stronger immediate positive impact on your training. Alternatively, and I think this is a lot of hypothetical at the moment, but if you're putting a bunch of extra food into your body, say an extra 800 to 1,000 calories, you know, from yesterday to the next day, and that's kind of your way forward, maybe a short metabolic type block could be effective, where you're taking shorter rests, doing same muscle group supersets or higher rep sets, something along those lines, maybe some more short overload movements. And this could help with nutrient partitioning, shuttling blood into the muscles and things like that. And so I think in that case, maybe you see some benefit to the metabolic style training for a few weeks before kind of going back to your standard straight set hypertrophy approach. But I do think if you're going to do the slow and steady reverse, that you don't really get the same benefit from doing metabolic training. And it might actually have a negative effect because you don't actually have enough food coming in to really take advantage of shuttling that into the muscles effectively. So that's kind of my thoughts on the training side.
No, it's a very good, I mean, again, I don't think I've seen anything in practice on that, but theoretically, I agree 100%. I think it makes perfect sense, especially for the person who like does want to immediately return food up, but is potentially like fearful of fat gain. It's a kind of, it's a cover your ass per se, will increase energy expenditure and, you know, in carbohydrate oxidation through this, you know, glycolytic training modality or training, I guess, pathway. It's a little bit safer there.
Yeah.
Cool. There was one con that I forgot to add on the hard and fast ramping calories up overnight. So I wanted to make sure I added that because this one's pretty important. Digestive capacity. As you diet, right, you will produce less hydrochloric acid in your stomach, right? The body adapts to the environment that you are providing it. And if your food volume is way down, like you'll produce less stomach acid, less digestive enzymes, those sorts of things. If you just flip a switch and like triple your food volume, you may get incredibly bloated. Your digestion will slow down like crazy. You might have some constipation and things like that. That's another con of the flipping the switch, and a potential reason that the slower and steady approach can work, because for people who've just spent however many weeks getting really, really lean, and then in 48 hours, they're all bloated and gassy and they don't even look like they have abs and stuff anymore. Like that can really, really fuck with some people mentally. And that's another where if a client I know has like iffy digestion, will do a slower, not necessarily like 100 calories per week, but I'm like, okay, here's 300, and I'll pay really close attention to what digestion has been like and give them specific instructions like, hey, do not have the fucking pizza or the burger or whatever, because this is what's going to happen. And then you're going to feel like dog shit because you think you just ruined your reverse sort of thing. But the digestive capacity is another variable in this.
Yeah. I just have one question about that because thinking about my own situation here selfishly, I'm still eating a ton of food because I'm doing all this biking. And so I wonder if someone were to use cardio as a primary tool to create their deficit, but not restrict food as much. So say they are at 3,000 calories and then they just add more cardio to lose their body weight to get to their goal. Instead of going down to 2,000 calories, they maintain 3,000 calories the whole time and just increase the dose of cardio. This person then is in a deficit, but they're not in a deficit because food volume is lower. They're in a deficit from outside factors. And so if that person then were to stop as much cardio, but keep eating the same amount of food, they would essentially create the reverse effect. So it would be almost like a reverse diet without changing calories, but by incrementally decreasing the amount of cardio you're doing. And it really has the exact same effect. And so I wonder if we would experience any of the same disruptions that you mentioned in that case, or if that would probably mitigate it because the food volume hasn't really changed.
I don't think you would encounter disruptions to the digestive capacity, but I still think you would run into the metabolic adaptations of the sex drive, those sorts of things. Like I have a client that we're dealing with this right now. Like he got very, very lean. We went through the reverse diet. Calories came way back up, 30, I want to say we're at like 3,700 calories. He's 186-ish pounds, and still had severe, metabolic adaptation signals. We got labs were all sex hormones across the board were in the gutter. Sex drive was still low. Like and what we had to do is we had to pull back activities because we were kind of bumping up to where like we couldn't push more food, right? Like the food, like digestive capacity was starting to be problematic. The timing, he's has like a 9 to 5, can't just eat every 2.5 hours at home like I do. And we literally had to pull his activity back so that we could start to allow like some of those adaptations to start to come down. So it's kind of like that. The way in the research, it's best described as like the female athlete triad, whereas like, your young girls, they don't eat, they're playing all these sports. They have, I forget the specific terminology, but the loss of cycle through like the activity level sort of thing. It's the same kind of scenario exists in males, but it's like it's the same concept. It's just the activity versus the food. Those are like two gas pedals. You know what I mean? So,
just because I just looked it up, we did do an episode on reverse dieting, and it was the one roundtable we did with Jeremiah Bear.
That is it. That was a good episode too.
It was. So that is episode 92, and it was from November of 2022.
Yep.
So I didn't go back far enough initially.
Yeah. I do think though, I mean, I'm sure the episode is probably very similar, but I do think we maybe got into the nitty gritty a little bit more in this one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a very female focused episode too, because I know Jeremiah works with a lot of females too. So,
yep.
I think today we took more of like a male kind of approach to the problem. So even though I think it does work across the board. Do you have anything else to add to kind of wrap up here?
No, but I guarantee someone's going to ask a question and I'm gonna be like, you know what? I completely missed that and I apologize. And maybe we'll update it in the next episode. But no, I think we covered this one pretty comprehensively. And I think we provided the listeners a pretty good informed route of which may be most appropriate. And I really think, like you said, if you're like on the fence, it's body fat specific. If you got very, very, very lean, faster is better, unless you got very, very, very lean and psychologically you think you're going to like binge and stuff, then you need to like stay a little bit more controlled and save yourself from yourself.
Yep. Love that. Yeah. So I think that was pretty well covered. If anyone has questions that they want answered in kind of long form and not just like, 2 to 3 minute answers in our Instagram Q&A, we always love kind of getting topic ideas like that. And then I'm sure going forward, we'll see the hamstrings episode and the arms training episode because we have to finish up our body part series. And we'll have another Instagram Q&A coming up for May as well. So a lot of good stuff in the works here.
Yeah. And I'll wrap this one up with what's really cool is our YouTube is actually kind of starting to finally get some traction. We're getting a lot of comments and stuff there. So if you're happen to listen to this to like, Spotify, Apple Podcasts from the other ones, please just drop us a subscribe over on YouTube so that we can just get things into typically the younger generation who is more poorly informed as we were when we were young. So get them a little bit more better information. So appreciate everyone as always. Brian and I will talk to you next week.